Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianoutsos. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Hey, thank you, Denis. And it's great to be here with you. And I love what you're doing.
Great, thank you. Hey, I've got a few questions for you, and I've obviously given our listeners a brief introduction to you. Tell me more about your background.
Yeah. So if I'm listening to this, the last thing I want to hear is someone to go through their whole freaking resume, right? So let me just give you hopefully the more interesting points. But I grew up in a steel town in Indiana in the U.S., and this was a huge U.S. Steel, it was called. So it was like its own city. But I ended up working as a janitor in the steel mill, going through high school and pretty much a lower middle class background. And so I was wildly motivated by fear. And growing up, being this janitor, I was a janitor in a hospital. So I had this experience of feeling definitely like an underdog, which really shaped me. And going from there, if you ever saw the Forrest Gump movie, there's a famous scene where Forrest is running and he shakes off his braces. And so I felt like looking back like Forrest Gump because I went to college and went to law school because I thought, hey, certainly I'll be able to take care of myself financially. And I hated it. I went back, got my MBA, went into pharmaceutical business and healthcare for 15 years, and then went to a different company, Johnson & Johnson, for another 13 years. And so through this whole adventure, being a woman, being Hispanic, and then coming out as gay, and then having a baby, I would say having a sixth grade sense of humor, I wasn't exactly the poster child for corporate America, but all of that ended up helping me be successful.
What a fascinating background that you've just shared with us. It's amazing. Going from janitor then into a C-suite kind of role. For what we see a lot of in the world today, there is that glass ceiling that a lot of people talk about, especially for females and leadership and things like that. One of the questions I've got is, how did you get into leadership? But then also, how did you transition into those highest, more senior roles?
Yeah, in the beginning, it was a lot about just sheer busting ass. I was a person that worked super hard, and oftentimes people would talk about sponsorship, and I didn't have a sponsor. And that happened when I was in my early 30s, and I met this wonderful leader at Lilly. He was 60, and I don't know, he saw something in me, and he took me under his wing, and he gave me a lot of different opportunities, which ultimately changed the trajectory of my career. And Denis, he gave me this incredible gift. And yes, it was the promotions and all that, but he gave me the gift of self-confidence. And when I think about the power that leaders have to give others, to enable, to unleash their self-confidence, I will never forget him. And he changed not only the trajectory of my career, but really he changed my life.
Well, I've got goosebumps just listening to what you're sharing there, because you see, it comes down to not just what we say, but it's how we treat people as leaders. And it's so impactful that it means for years later, listeners, that you can be still impacted by that one person, that one conversation, that one word. And I think that, as you said, the gift of self-confidence, that's just a beautiful way of saying it. However, what he actually did was he actually saw what you had something you could offer, and helping you bring that out and actually helping other organizations. I think that is, Denise, I don't know, I'm going to ask the question here. I think that's what our roles as leaders is, to bring the best out of other people. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. And I truly believe that having come from a background where as a janitor and not being in the in crowd, I didn't feel seen. And you don't forget those feelings. And so as I moved into leadership positions, a lot of hard work, but also individuals that truly helped me and opened doors along the way, I had some tenets that I really believed in. And that is that leading others is such a privilege. And it's a privilege because, sure, it impacts the business, but it also gives meaning to our life. And when you look back, they always say you won't necessarily remember those business results, but you'll remember people and those people that still keep in touch with you, the people that tell you stories about maybe how you've helped them. And so I learned about leadership that we have the ability to help others be seen. And when they're seen, they can flourish. We have the ability to impact their self-confidence. We have the ability to help them dream. And also when we do that, it's a ripple effect. It impacts their families. It impacts all kind of things. And today where engagement is just, it's always been critically important. But today with so much incredible change happening in the world, the leader's ability to embrace or to really grab people's, not their minds, but their hearts, to me is so important and so fundamental. And it requires us to let go of our own bullshit and our own ego.
Oh, absolutely. Listeners, if you didn't hear it, embrace and actually grabbing people's hearts and helping them. Let go of your ego, let go of the bullshit, just get on with it. It is beautiful stuff that Denice is sharing here with us. That's awesome. And so the question I've got here is, this person could be reliable from history. Now, you may have many. I was to ask, who's your favorite leader and why?
It was this, I'm telling you, it was this guy, Alan Clark. And then I had another woman who really helped me, and her name was Sherry McCoy. And she worked at Johnson & Johnson, and then she went on to be the CEO of Avon. She's on a lot of boards, but she was another person that if you were to look at the two of us, you would say, oh, that's weird. You know, what's that connection? Oh, she was always just impeccably dressed. Your listeners could see me, I'm in a t-shirt and whatever. And that's what I'm most comfortable in, right? And my hair's spiky and I'm not going to have fancy shoes on. I'm going to have some kind of cool shoes on, but not designer shoes. They might be designer tennis shoes. But when I look at these two individuals, they not only, the things that they did for me was they created opportunities, but they gave me that insight and coaching and feedback too. Like I always say, feedback's a gift, and who really believes that? But I think they cared enough to give me advice and to tell me when maybe I was wobbly a little bit, but also to let me know that they believed in me. And I wanted to please them. They took a chance on me. And I had this, and I still do. On Thanksgiving Day, if Alan Clark were here, I would write him a long text. And unfortunately, he's passed. Every Thanksgiving, I write to Sherry McCoy and say to her, like, man, you changed my life. And when you changed my life at work, you changed my family's life, because I got bigger opportunities and I made more money and got introduced to different people. And so I have immense gratitude for these individuals and others. I've been very fortunate that as I got older, I figured out how important it is to reach out and connect with others. And that was so hard for me in the beginning, because I thought, what do I have in common with these people? I don't have the same background. I felt awkward. And I would sit down and have those one-on-ones. And the night before, I'd be like, oh, shit, I have to go to dinner, or I have to have lunch with this person. And what the hell am I going to talk about? And then when I realized, why not just do you, right? Why not just do you? Why not talk about what you're watching on TV or what you're doing to connect in a different way? That gave me a superpower. And the superpower was honestly just being a real person. And most people, when we're real, people trust us more. They find it more interesting. And so I evolved from self-acceptance to self-celebration. And in doing that, I really think I was able to unwrap the skills that I have.
I think the way I would answer that is, no one is more surprised than I am that you and I are here having this conversation today, and that I'm doing the things that I'm doing in life now. I think that's if all of us take a second to reflect, that's a story that probably all of us that resonates with everyone, right?
Yeah, and reflecting is a huge tool, a huge thing for us to do. And I'm not sure that a lot of people do take time out to reflect. And I actually say to people that I work with as well around the world, take time out to reflect and think about what's just happened and what you've done. And because a lot of people seem to think about the things that haven't gone well for them, but what about what things that did go well for you? And what are you the gratitude you have for certain things? I find that interesting. Kevin, whereabouts in the world are you today?
I am sitting in my parlor in Washington, D.C.
Awesome. And I'm in New Zealand. So it's just amazing how we can talk about leadership and mental health and so forth from around the different sides of the world, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Kevin, how did you get into leadership?
I would answer that question by saying I've always been some kind of leader. And I think in my adolescence years, I went through this rough period there that I was actually considering not being a good kid. And I had one of those experiences that I think so many of us have, that we promise God, if I can just live through this moment, I'll walk the straight and narrow.
Yeah.
And so I had one of those experiences when I was around 14 years of age. And I made a conscious decision that what leadership skills I had or the person I wanted to be was going to be a good person. And I think that was a conscious decision for me, because before that, it was very clear that I could use those skills in a bad way, but I made a conscious decision to use those skills in a good way when I was about 14.
Yeah. And it's interesting how it was conscious that you made that decision. I think a lot of people in life are on autopilot. They just do things day in, day out, whatever comes up. But if we are a little bit more conscious in our decision making, then I think will pretty help us. So it's really interesting. That whole period for you of you could go off, not be good versus good, that whole transition, you making that conscious decision, how hard was that for you? What was the experience like?
Dennis, the experience I had is I almost lost my life as a teenager, sort of in the middle of I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. In the mid-90s, there was a raging gang war. And while I wasn't in a gang, I was caught in the war, if that makes sense. And so for me, the decision was pretty easy. I was laying on the ground with bullets flying over my head. And I promised God, if I could just, through that moment, that I would be a completely different person. So in that moment, the decision was not hard because I was making a decision about the type of life that I wanted to live. But I'd imagine, Dennis, that if I had not had that moment of reckoning, that decision would have been harder for me. So I think that's an important point, that I had this moment of reckoning, that I was literally forced to decide what type of life I wanted to live and who did I really want to be. Whether or not when, my eulogy was written, would I bring honor to my family or would it be a eulogy of shame?
Oh, amazing. That is just really amazing, because when we step back and reflect on, going back to what you said originally about reflecting and that, it's just amazing to see what I call those turning points in our lives, those areas of, as you said, reckoning and having to make a decision right there and then. Really amazing. Kevin, now this person could be alive or from history. Who's your favorite leader and why?
So I think you mentioned earlier in your introduction of me that I just penned my first book. And it's only after writing my first book, and I spent a lot of time writing about my maternal grandmother, and her name is LMA. Now, I should tell you, in the American South, in many families, it's disrespectful to call your elders by their first name. But in my family, even today, we still call my maternal grandmother LMA. And by the way, she's 104 years old. But it was only in writing my book and I was recalling these lessons and in life that she taught me and my family, my extended cousins, that I realized that not only is she sort of the matriarch of my family, but she's also the leader who I respect the most.
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, wow. 104 years of age.
104.
Yeah.
She even survived COVID, by the way.
Oh, she got COVID as well and survived it?
She got COVID and survived. Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing. Good on her. That's fantastic. And I think that for all of us, with our elders, our grandparents and so forth, some people don't have their grandparents anymore. They've lost their grandparents. But if you have, even for our listeners, take time to sit with them and learn from them. Take time to reflect with them, because they have a wealth of knowledge and so much that they can learn. And Kevin, you and I are probably at an age where we've seen certain things in our lives, but they've seen a lot in their lives. And you think about where your grandmother was right through to now and what she's seen in the different stages of life, and things have changed. It's amazing. And what they're going to be able to tell you about things is, I think we all can learn so much from them all.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, before I penned my book, I never thought of her, quote, as a leader. I just thought of her as my grandmother. And I think that's even a lesson in that, because it's really like many of us are providing examples of leading, being a leader, and we're unconscious that somebody's watching us, that someone's mimicking us, that we're teaching valuable lessons just by the things that we do on a daily basis. And I think my reflection on her is so many of my values, so much of how I interact with people, so of my desire to be kind, to be genuine for people comes from the type of behavior that I saw her model in front of me.
Yep. And that's something that we need to be mindful as well, as we're modeling things too. And as you said, I love it, because leaders aren't always having to be in a corporate or a public health environment. It is everywhere. And we can learn so much from people. And I recently released episode 200. And
congratulations.
Thank you. And I was interviewed, and I was asked that question, who's my favorite leader? And I said, my grandfather. And
I love that.
Yeah. And so I explained why. And a lot of it is, he was a president of this island in Greece where my dad's from. And it wasn't as if he was this large corporate kind of guy. He was the president, the mayor of the island type scenario for 28 years, but he led the island. He led people, and he knew his place as well, because my grandmother was the real leader and his place. But I think it was really great. So when I ask people this, they say all sorts of people like Mandela and Gandhi and other people. When I hear people who say the grandmother, the grandfather, family members, someone else close to them, it's special. I think it's not to take away from the others what they've said, but I think that's really special.
I would like to say this because it goes a step further and gives some definition to why I now call her a leader. She didn't have a lot of money, but she was quite resourceful. Her husband had died from dementia. So instead of him being put in a nursing home, she wanted him to come stay with her in his final years of life. And so I saw her provide that level of care for him. That's like what an example that is in itself of being a caretaker. So that also meant like my adolescence years growing up, like I didn't have a grandfather there, and she lost a son when he was 25, he drowned, and her other son had gone away to the Navy. So she didn't have any sort of maternal or male figures. There weren't any male figures. It was my grandmother and my aunts. But she taught us how to use a hammer. She taught us how to fix things, and she taught us how to cut grass, how to tend to the garden. So it's like all of these things that typically people think in the rural South, that these are things that men would teach boys how to do. Here I had a grandmother teaching me how to do those things. And then on top of that, she even taught me how to cook, and she taught me how to be kind and how to be generous. And so I say to my friends sometimes that I often think that I have this perfect balance of masculine and feminine energy at the same time. And they said, where does that come from? I think it comes from like the role model of my grandmother, because she taught us that there wasn't a task reserved for men. There wasn't a task reserved for women. And she taught us how to take what we had and to work with it. And yeah, she is like, in my book of leaders that I respect the most, that's her.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.